I often appear on fault lines, and I love appearing on fault lines. It's a lot of fun. I like to mix it up with Lee and Garland, and normally it is mixing it up, but today's election day, and so they didn't have a huge amount of time to go back and forth, so fair enough. While there, though, today I was kind of, my disembodied voice was essentially holding it down, and the issue of voter suppression came up. Now, Lee is a right winger, more of an independent right winger, but a right winger nonetheless. And today, an exchange took place where it wasn't really an exchange. Lee just kind of spewed utter nonsense. And he is existing in a right-wing bubble that is fighting a losing war with reality itself. I am going to show the clip, and I'm going to explain why everything that he said was utter lunacy. Let's take a look at this. And by the way, Lee is more than welcome to come onto this show to make this argument that voter suppression doesn't exist. It's all in people's mind. The statistics and the mathematics behind the idea of the nonsense of voter fraud and all this other stuff, that's hooey. He can explain how his world of unicorns is possible. But until then, I'm just going to play his clip, and I'm going to let his clip stand for him in place of him. And again, he's more than welcome to come on the show. I always offer that to anybody who I'm having a go at. Even people who I like Lee. And by the way, I like Lee. I like our exchanges, so I don't want this to be misconstrued as a negative on him. Let's keep.
Okay, Florida, Georgia, governor's race. Jamarl, who wins?
I'm going to go with Stacey Adams. Now, with the
I hope not, because Stacey Abrams is running.
That's right, Stacey Adams.
That's like
that would be big news.
Yeah, he's got some nice shoes, don't get me wrong. A little shiny for me, but okay, Florida.
Stacey Abrams. So Gillum, I'm going to go with Gillum in Florida. Again, with the caveat, like some of this stuff depends on whether or not people are allowed to vote. And if after the election you find that there were X number of people that were scrubbed off the rolls, so, you know, but I think Gillum has a chance in Florida.
Okay, what about the marijuana referendum?
I'll just say this. Nobody's scrubbed off the rolls. That's not what happens. What happens is if you go to a state where they have voter ID.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm 100% serious. What you do is you cast a provisional ballot. That's what happens. And then you show it.
By the way, right here, the provisional ballot stuff is nonsense. Those things get thrown away. Right off the bat, we're starting in flamboyant unreality. But let's keep going. Those provisional ballots are nonsense. You could write, you know, Bob Barker on those provisional ballots for all that matter. They get thrown away. Let's keep going.
All the states have systems. This is absolute fear-mongering by the Democrats. They're trying to convince...
Fear-mongering. No.
They're trying to convince black people... This is what's going on. They're trying to convince black people that it's all Jim Crow again. It's not that. It's insulting to black people. Black people are perfectly capable of getting driver's licenses and IDs and everything else. Absolutely, that's not an issue. And it's just racist to assume that the black folks can't figure out... Well, they can't figure out how to get driver's licenses.
I tell you,
That's Orwellian. That's Orwellian. It is racist to assume that blacks can't get driver's license. Look, I don't care what people can do. I care what people will do. I care about what happens, not what can happen in the world of unicorns. If everything was great in the world of unicorns and rainbows and everybody had $1 billion, the world would be a great place. But that's not the world to which we live. And Republicans know when they're passing these laws that there are certain people that have statistically higher opportunities or chances of having certain IDs versus not. They also know that there are going to be certain demographics and certain groups that will most likely have a particular ID in order to get to the polls. And they know that more likely than not, the people who are voting for them will have those things, or will statistically more likely get to wherever they need to get those things. They are putting a hurdle that they know will inhibit some more than others. with this idea of scrubbing a few people off the rolls. Nobody said Jim Crow. I never mentioned Jim Crow. I said they are making things difficult and suppressing the vote, which is exactly what is taking place. Let's look at reality for the moment. So let's not even go to blacks. What about Native Americans? What about Native Americans? This is Standing Rock. This is taking place right now. Defenders were working her last job. Let's go to this part. North Dakota counties that voted Democrat in 2012 Senate election when she learned that the U.S. Supreme Court had upheld the North Dakota's voter ID law. The law will require each voter to present identification that displays residential address, a major barrier for tribal members since thousands of Native American voters don't use a home address. Defender's home is in South Dakota side of the Standing Rock, but it's typical of communities throughout the reservation. The law is widely understood as a result of Republican state Congress members' cynical mathematics. 6 years ago, North Dakota Native Americans helped swing the Democratic Heidi Heitkamp narrowly into the United States House or Senate by less than 3,000 votes. The next year, state Republicans introduced a new law, the voter ID law. Tribes fought it in court until it was upheld in October 9th, when the Supreme Court declined to support their appeal. Now, they passed this law knowing it was going to disenfranchise voters. But let's challenge the original premise first, right? I mean, because right now, the Republican Party did this. They have all the incentive in the world to try to shave off a few percentage points of the vote in order to help their people get in office. It's cynical, but they have every incentive in the world to do it. This is politics. The goal of politics is to win. And the Constitution matters less in that case, especially if the Constitution is going to make it, or what they provide will make it difficult for people who you or people of your party to get elected. Yes, it's cynical, but it is what's taking place. It has nothing to do with Democrats. Democrats, when they had the opportunity, did the same thing with moving polling locations and all this other stuff, and giving long lines, knowing full well that many people won't want to stand in those long lines. Like, these are the things that these political leaders do in order to try to help their party take and keep power. The Republican Party has just been doing it perversely. Let's keep going, because it's not just North Dakota. But originally, let's challenge the premise. Voter ID. Voter fraud that's ubiquitous. Lee's talking about, well, blacks can get this stuff and this is nonsense. Well, that's Native Americans. They did this to Native Americans for the exact same reason they do it to Hispanics and black communities. In this case, it was for Heidi Heitkamp. We need to stop that woman from getting elected. She got elected by only a few thousand votes. It was the Native Americans that helped swing that vote. How can we stop those Native Americans from voting? Well, we can't stop them from voting, but can we make it difficult? Yes. Let's make it difficult. Let's put another hurdle in their way. Let's challenge the premise. Voter ID. Because Republicans have been screaming to high heaven that there is ubiquitous voter fraud. Voter fraud. Voter fraud is all over the place. Voter fraud is everywhere. Voter fraud is everywhere. Let's look at studies. Don't take my word for it. A comprehensive study... A comprehensive study in 2014 published in the Washington Post found that 31 credible instances of impersonation fraud from 2000 to 2014 out of more than 1 million ballots cast. Think about what we're saying here. 31 credible instances of impersonation fraud. That's the only thing the voter ID laws would block. Out of more than 1 billion ballots. Republicans are screaming that voter ID laws are there to protect the vote and all this other stuff. What are they protecting? That's nonsense. 2 studies done in Arizona State University, one in 2012, one in 2016, found similar negligible rates of impersonation fraud. The project found 10 cases of voter impersonation fraud nationwide from 2000 to 2012. The follow-up study, which looked for fraud specifically in states where politicians have argued that the fraud is a pernicious problem, found zero successful prosecutions for impersonation fraud in 5 states. So then you have to ask the question, why are they putting in voter ID laws? If the impersonation fraud that they're screaming about doesn't exist, then why are they doing it? Why are they doing it? Again, I don't care what the world could be in this very specific instance. I care about what the world is. And to say that, well, all of these groups could get these voter ID laws, all of them could, potentially, yes, potentially. But that's not what happens. I'm looking at what happens in the real world, and what you find is a suppression of the vote for something that doesn't exist. But in Lee's world, this is racist to incite this, to say this. It's not racist, it's called reality. It's what a Republican Party that has all incentive in the world to do this in order to keep their grip on power in certain districts where they are losing the electorate. That's the reality. Let's keep going. There's more. There's more. There's more. Because I want to thoroughly bash this perspective, this non-reality based perspective of the world that he's pursuing. Interstate cross-check. Let's look at that. Interstate voter registration cross-check program, which is being promoted as a powerful Republican operative by a powerful Republican operative, and its list of potential duplicate voters are kept confidential. Now, this was a program that they were using in the last election, where they were saying that we're going to look at all of this data from all of these various states, and we're going to aggregate this data and get rid of people who may be voting in various multiple states. Now, I've shown you the research that says the premise of this doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. They're making this up. And there are people who are existing in bubbles of unreality, like Lee Stranahan, that is pushing this idea that it doesn't exist. When you're making the point that they are trying to intentionally suppress the vote to maintain power, it's racist to think that they're doing this. No, it's not racist to think that they're doing this. It has nothing to do with race. It's everything to do with the Republican Party. It just so happens that African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, all of these other racial graphics vote Democrat. It's nothing to do with race. It's everything to do with stopping a certain demographic from voting. I never said race, because I don't think it's about race. I think it's about politics. 28 participating states share the voter list, and in the name of dispassionate, race-blind big data, seeks to ensure that the rolls are up to date. To make sure the system finds suspected voters, cross-check supposedly match first name, middle name, and last name, plus birth date, and provides the last 4 digits of the social security number to additional verification. In reality, however, there have been signs that the program doesn't operate as advertised. Some states have dropped out of cross-check, citing problems with its methodology, as Oregon Secretary of State recently explained. Now, instead of I am okay with voter ID if everybody gets a card. If everybody gets a voter registration card, I am okay with that. But that in reality is not what happens. Let's get to this point. We were able to obtain more lists. Georgia and Washington State, the total number of voters adding up to more than 1 million matches. The cross-check results seem to be deeply flawed. We found that 1/4 of the names in the list actually lack a middle name match. So just first name and last name. The system also mistakenly identified fathers and sons of the same voter. My grandfather's name was McCoy Thomas. My uncle's name is McCoy Thomas. He, if he was in one of those states, would not have been able to vote because it would have kicked him off the list. I'm trying to get across this thing. This is nonsense. That there's no incentive for the Republican Party and no action on that incentive to suppress the vote of certain demographics that are adverse to them getting in office. The system also mistakenly followed right. A whole lot of people named James Brown are suspected of voting or registering twice. 357 of them in Georgia alone. But according to Crosscheck, James Willie Brown is supposed to be the same name voter as James Arthur Brown. James Clifford Brown is allegedly the same voter as James Lynn Brown. This is deeply flawed. It's not even using a middle name. And those promised birth dates and social security numbers, the cross-check instruction manual says social security numbers are included for verification and numbers might or might not match, which leaves a crucial step in the identification process up to the states. Social Security numbers weren't even included in the state list obtained. This is a flawed system. That's assuming that you believe the nonsense, that this wasn't based on this idea of scrubbing voters. We had Mark Sweetland, a data expert guy whose clients include eBay and American Express, look at the data from Georgia and Virginia, and he was shocked by cross-states' childish methodology. He added, God forbid your name is Garcia, in which there are 858,000 in the United States, and your first name is Joseph or Jose. You're probably suspected of voting in 27 states. Sweetland's statistical analysis found that African Americans, Latino, and Asian names predominate, a simple result of cross-checks matching process, which spews out a little more than a bunch of common names. No surprise. The United States Census data shows that minorities are overrepresented in 85 of 100 of the most common last names. If your name is Washington, there's an 89% chance you're African American. If your name is Hernandez, there's a 94% chance your name is Hispanic. If your name is Kim, there's a 95% chance you are Asian. The inherent bias results in an astonishing 1 in 6 Hispanics, 1 in 7 Asian Americans, and 1 in 9 African Americans in cross-check states landing on the list. Was the program designed to target voters of color? I'm a data guy, Sweetland says. I can't tell you what the intent was. I can tell you what the outcome is, and the outcome is discriminatory against minorities. Every voter in the state marked as legitimate matching receives a postcard that is colorless and covered with minuscule text. The voter must verify his or her address and mail it back to their Secretary of State. Failure to do so, your name is taken off the voter rolls. The postcard amplifies cross-states' built-in racial bias. According to the Census Bureau, white voters are 21% more likely than blacks and Hispanics to respond to official requests. Homeowners are 32% more likely to respond to renters, and the young are 74% less likely than the old to respond. What do you know? All Democratic constituencies. I don't argue that this is an issue of race. I argue that this is an issue of politics. That there are certain demographics that is known as a flat fact known in real physical matter reality, not some conceptual thing, to be less likely to do certain things. And by putting a bar and a barrier in the middle of the voting process, when the pretext of it doesn't even exist, then the first question to a skeptical person is, well, why are they doing this? Why? And what is the outcome of the thing that they're doing? Meaning, once they come up with this nonsense pretext and they're coming up with a plan of action that just so happens to scrub off a few percentage points of a demographic that doesn't vote in their interest. Mind you, during the election of Democrats, when they were going with this idea of we need to close this polling location, even though there were when all thoughts would be that there would be more people that were going to be going to the polls. We need to make these lines longer so there'll be less people to vote, because we know that there's a certain percentage of people who are more so likely to vote for us will stay in those lines. Yes, conceptually, people could stay in those lines. In that ideal perfect world of unicorns, yes, people do. In the real world reality that we have with us, no, we don't. I don't care about the conceptual reality of what people could do. I care about what people actually do. Let's go further. There's more. There's more. Like I said, this is a reality-based world that I'm putting for. This is not, we're talking about new age stuff. This is stuff that is understood. This is a program, an algorithm that was used to look at the way voter registration, voter laws, and those type of things were used. And even this tool comes up. Using this tool, researchers confirm that voting rights advocates already know to be true, that black voters are less likely to have adequate identification under voter ID laws. According to the study, 3.6% of the registered white voters had no match in state or federal ID database. By contrast, 7.5% of black voters were missing those from those databases. The algorithm shows a clear and disturbing racial disparity on voting rights. It's straightforward. There's more. Look at cross-check. The number of people that were scrubbed from the voter rolls, getting this non-working provisional ballot that nobody reads. The system called cross-check is detailed in Rose Sloan's report. Trump victories a margin in Michigan, 13,000. Cross-check purge, 449,000. Trump's victory in Arizona, 85,000. Cross-check purge, 270,000. Trump's victory in North Carolina, 177,000. Cross-check purge, 589,000. This is reality. This is reality. Recently, Stacey Abrams. This is Georgia. Stacey Abrams was attempting to register hundreds, I think it was like several 100,000 people onto the voter rolls. The person who's running against Stacey Abrams, Brian Kemp, is also Secretary of State, meaning just like Deborah Wasserman Schultz had essentially given over the reins to Hillary Clinton, and both things were happening at the same time, meaning the person who was running in the race to some degree was controlling the political apparatus itself, which was nonsense. Well, same thing is happening here. Both people are running for governor. Kemp is presiding over the election to which he is running in. Okay? In presiding over this particular election, Kemp got rid of... Georgia removed more than 534,000 voters that way in 2016 and 2017. Using database employed by commercial mailing firms, analysts commissioned by Palace Group found that 334,134 of those citizens actually live in an address they registered. Lawsuits have charged that Kemp blocked registrations of 50,000 would-be voters, 80% of them black, Latino, or Asian. Just saying. Just saying. It's not about race. It's not about race at all. It's about politics and disenfranchisement of certain groups that tend to vote for a different political party. If these people, if Asians and blacks and Hispanics vote Republican, none of these voter IDs laws would exist. None. So, I'm going to end this here because this has gone far too long. Lee is perfectly allowed on the show to have a conversation about this. I'm more than open to it. I would have loved to have said some of this on Fault Lines. I didn't get the opportunity to say this on Fault Lines, so fair enough. But I will end this here. Yeah, I'll end this here. And by the way, I love my back and forths with Lee. So this is not a hit on Lee per se. He's a right winger. But you have to acknowledge this. What people will do or can do is less relevant than what they do absolutely end up doing. And if you can look at the statistical data and you can see that there's a disparity against a particular demographic and that the premise to which you're using to disparage these people or get rid of these people doesn't exist, then just come on. At least come up with a solution that allows everyone to vote. If you don't come up with a solution that allows everyone to vote, then making up stuff in order to help your side becomes nonsense. Becomes nonsense. That argument that Lee put forth here was nonsense. I'm sorry. There are other arguments that I may agree with Lee on. This is not one of them. So I will end this here. Like I said, he is more than welcome to come onto the show to make his point of view. But you all have a good day, and I'll see you shortly. Thanks all.